Adrian Cole was the kind of man whose name carried weight in the city. People spoke of him in hushed tones, with half admiration and half fear. They said he was a genius in business, a man who turned dust into gold. He was also known as cold, distant and untouchable, the sort of person who lived behind tall gates and never needed anyone. His mansion stood at the edge of the city, an enormous place made of stone, glass, and silence. To outsiders, the mansion looked alive with beauty. Grand staircases, polished chandeliers, rooms filled with rare art. But to the people inside, especially the small group of servants who worked there, the house often felt empty. There was no laughter echoing in the halls, no family dinners, no warmth. Just the sound of footsteps and the ticking of the giant clock in the entrance hall. Among the staff was a young maid named Maria. She was no more than 20, though her tired eyes made her look older. She had been working there for almost a year. To most, she was invisible. Just another girl in a plain uniform, moving quietly from room to room, dusting tables, sweeping floors, carrying laundry. She never complained, never asked for favors. If spoken to, she answered politely, with, or, a soft smile that never fully reached her eyes. Adrian hardly noticed her in the beginning. He was too busy with meetings, calls, and numbers running through his mind. Servants were part of the background of his life. Like furniture, they were necessary, but they did not matter to him. He paid them well, treated them fairly, but kept his distance. That was his way. And yet there was something about Maria that was different. She worked harder than most, often staying up longer than the others. Sometimes Adrian would pass her in the hall late in the evening, carrying a basket of laundry, or polishing the edges of the windows. She never looked tired in front of him. She always bowed her head respectfully and returned to her work. Still, she was careful not to be noticed too much. For Maria, this job was not just about cleaning a mansion, it was survival. She had grown up in poverty, raised in a small village where opportunities were rare and struggles were plenty. Every coin she earned in the mansion mattered. Half of it went straight to her younger brother, who was still in school back home. She never told anyone this, but her heart beat with a quiet determination. She was not going to remain a maid forever. She wanted to be more, to rise above the weight of her circumstances. But dreams, she believed, were things to be hidden. They were too fragile to expose to others, especially someone like Adrian Cole. In her mind, he was a man who belonged to another world, a world of wealth, power, and decisions made in tall glass towers. Why would he ever care about the dreams of a poor maid? So she worked in silence during the day, and at night when the mansion grew still, when the grand halls went dark and the other servants lay asleep, Maria lit a small candle in her room. That was when she allowed her hidden world to come alive. She opened her worn-out notebooks, scribbled notes, practiced grammar, solved math problems, and read borrowed books. Her hands ached, her eyes grew heavy, but she refused to stop. She believed education was her only chance to escape this cycle, her only bridge to the life she wanted. Adrian, of course, did not know this. He spent his nights in the large study drinking coffee while reading business reports or sometimes walking through the silent halls to clear his mind. He thought of his life as complete, wealthy, respected, and secure. Yet there was a loneliness he never admitted to himself, a quiet emptiness that all the gold in the world could not fill. It was on one of those nights, while seeking a book from his private library, that Adrian noticed something unusual. A faint glow flickered from under the servants' quarters door. It was far past midnight, too late for any of them to be awake. At first he frowned, thinking perhaps one of them had forgotten to blow out a lamp. But curiosity tugged at him. He stepped closer, his polished shoes silent against the marble floor. He pushed the door open gently, expecting to see nothing more than an empty room. Instead, what he saw made him pause. Maria was sitting at a small desk, her head bent low, her face glowing in the candlelight. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't even resting. She was writing, furiously as if every second mattered. Around her were books and scattered notes. Her lips moved silently, as though she was repeating the words she read. Adrian had never seen one of his servants like this. Not cleaning, not working, but studying as if her very soul depended on it. And in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Cole felt something unusual stir inside his chest. The mansion was always quiet at night. The servants' quarters were dark, the kitchens were closed, and the great halls slept under the weight of silence. The only sound that usually lingered was the ticking of the grand clock in the entrance hall. But that night, something disturbed the stillness. Adrian Cole, who had left his study to find a book, noticed a faint golden light flickering down the corridor. It came from a place where no light should have been, the small rooms of the staff. At first, he thought it was an accident. Perhaps a servant had forgotten to put out a lamp. Perhaps someone had carelessly left a candle burning. In his world, small mistakes like that were rare. He hired disciplined people, and they all knew the rules. Yet curiosity tugged at him. Stronger than logic. He moved closer, his footsteps soft against the cold marble floor. The glow grew brighter as he approached the half-shut door. He stopped, listening. The house was silent, but beyond the door he could hear the faint scratch of a pen against paper. Adrian hesitated. A part of him told him to turn back, whatever. The servants did in their own rooms was not his concern. He was their employer, not their friend. And yet something compelled him to look. Slowly he pushed the door open. The scene before him froze him in place. Maria sat at a small wooden desk, the only piece of furniture in the tiny room apart from her bed. Her posture was bent, her head leaning close to the paper as though afraid to lose even a second. Her black hair fell loosely over her shoulders, glowing faintly in the candlelight. Her lips moved silently, whispering words to herself as she wrote. Her uniform was wrinkled after a long day of work, and her hands looked tired. But her eyes, Adrian noticed, were burning with something he had not seen in years. Determination. Books were stacked on one side of the desk, old, borrowed textbooks with bent corners and notes scribbled on nearly every page. Her fingers moved quickly as though every word on the page was a treasure she could not afford to forget. Adrian stood there quietly, almost afraid to break the moment. He had seen employees working hard before. He had seen people desperate for money, desperate for survival. But this was different. Maria wasn't working for him now. She was working for something else entirely, something invisible, something personal. For the first time, he saw her not as a maid, but as a person, with a secret world hidden behind those quiet eyes. Maria did not notice him at first. She was too focused, her pen scratching across the paper, her lips whispering sentences again and again until they sounded right. But when the wooden door creaked slightly under his hand, she turned her head suddenly, her eyes widened in shock. The pen slipped from her hand and fell onto the floor. She jumped up, nearly knocking over the candle. Sir?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I'm sorry." Her cheeks turned red as she tried to cover the open books with her hands as if she had been caught doing something shameful. "Forgive me, sir. I wasn't." Adrian raised his hand slightly, stopping her flood of apologies. His face was unreadable, his voice calm but curious. "Relax," he said slowly. "I only asked what you are doing awake at this hour." Maria lowered her head, ashamed. Her hands trembled as she clutched her notebook to her chest. For a moment, she did not answer. Then, in a voice so soft it almost disappeared into the silence, she whispered, "I was studying." The word lingered in the air between them, strange and unexpected inside a servant's room. "Studying?" Adrian repeated, as though he could not believe it. She nodded quickly, afraid of his reaction. Yes, sir. For exams. I want to apply for college. Someday." Her voice cracked as she said it. She had never confessed this dream aloud to anyone. In the mansion, to her, dreams were fragile things too easy to break if someone laughed at them. Now, standing before her employer, she felt exposed, vulnerable, like a child caught holding a secret too big for her hands. She braced herself for anger or ridicule. She imagined him saying she was foolish or telling her to stop wasting time. She imagined him reminding her that she was only a maid and that maids did not belong in colleges. But Adrian did none of those things. He only stood there, staring at her with eyes that seemed strangely thoughtful, as though something inside him had shifted, and for the first time in her life, Maria felt the weight of being truly seen. Maria stood frozen in the small room, her hands clutching her notebook as if it were a shield. The candlelight flickered nervously, casting shadows across the wall, as if even the flame understood her fear. Adrian Cole remained in the doorway, tall, calm, and unreadable. His sharp eyes rested on her trembling figure, and for a long moment the silence felt heavier than stone. Finally, his voice broke through. "Maria." The sound of her name on his lips made her flinch. She lowered her gaze instantly, her heart beating wildly. "Yes, sir?" "What are you doing?" His tone was not harsh, not angry, just curious, almost puzzled. But to Maria it felt like a question with the power to decide her future. Her throat went dry. She wanted to lie, to say she had been writing a letter or finishing some work for the house. But something inside her refused. Maybe it was exhaustion from months of hiding, or maybe it was the strange softness in his voice. Whatever it was, the truth slipped out. "I was studying," she whispered. Adrian stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the open books, the scattered notes, the worn-out pen lying on the floor. "Studying," he repeated, almost to himself. His gaze returned to her. "Why?" Maria's breath caught. "Why?" The question sounded so simple, but it carried the weight of all her struggles, all her hopes, all her nights of fighting against sleep just to memorize a page. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice low and shaky. "Because I want to apply. For college, not now, maybe not soon, but someday. I want to learn more. I want to—" Her words faltered. She looked down, ashamed, as if daring to dream in front of him was a crime. Adrian tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "And you do this at night?" She nodded quickly, her eyes still fixed on the floor. "Yes, sir, it's the only time I have. During the day I have to work, and when I'm finished, the house is already quiet, so I stay awake. Even if I am tired." Her hands trembled as she pressed the notebook tighter against her chest. "I'm sorry, sir. I know this is not proper. I know I should only think about my duties here. But—" Her voice cracked, and she blinked rapidly to stop, tears from falling. "But I don't want to remain like this forever." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in thought. He was not used to hearing such words from a maid. Most of his staff were content with their wages, their stability. But Maria was different. She was not satisfied with surviving. She wanted to fight for more. After a long pause, he asked, "What is it you wish to become?" Her head lifted a little, surprise flashing in her eyes. She had not expected him to ask. She swallowed hard and answered, "A teacher. I want to teach children. I want to give them what I never had. Knowledge. A chance. Hope." Her voice softened as she spoke, but the fire in her eyes grew brighter. For a moment, she forgot her fear and spoke from her heart. "If I can do that, then maybe my brother won't have to live the same life I did. Maybe he will see the world differently." Adrian listened in silence, his face still calm. But inside, something shifted. He remembered his own past. Nights when he studied under a broken lamp. Days when hunger gnawed at him, when people told him he would never rise above his poverty. He remembered how it felt to be dismissed, to be invisible, to be underestimated. Looking at Maria, he saw a reflection of himself years ago. Maria, meanwhile, mistook his silence for disapproval. Her chest tightened with dread. She lowered her notebook and bowed her head deeply. "I'm sorry, sir. I know it is foolish. I know someone like me should not dream of things like this. Please don't be angry. Please. Forgive me." Her voice shook as the first tear slipped down her cheek. She expected him to tell her to stop, to scold her for wasting time. She braced herself for words that would crush the fragile hope she had kept alive. But the words never came. Instead, Adrian said, quietly, "Lift your head, Maria." She froze, her tears hanging on her lashes. Slowly, she raised her gaze to meet his. His eyes, usually sharp and cold, now looked softer, almost distant, as if lost in memory. "I am not angry," he said. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "I only wanted to understand." Maria's lips parted slightly, her breath caught in surprise. For the first time since he had walked in, a flicker of relief touched her heart. Adrian looked at the books again, then back at her. "Do not hide this from me again. If you are going to chase something, chase it without shame." His words left her stunned, unable to speak. She simply nodded, her chest trembling with emotions she couldn't name, fear, relief, and a strange spark of hope. And that night Maria realized that her secret was no longer hidden. The candle flickered softly, casting shadows that danced along the walls of the small room. Maria sat back down on her chair, her hands resting on the open notebook, though her fingers still trembled slightly. Across from her, Adrian stood silent, his sharp figure filling the doorway. For the first time in her life, Maria felt cornered, not by cruelty, but by the weight of being seen. No one had ever asked her why she studied. No one had cared enough to know. Yet here stood her employer, the man who owned the mansion, waiting for an answer. She bit her lip, uncertain. But something about his eyes, the way they were steady, not mocking, made her believe she could speak. So she took a slow breath and began. "I was not born into much, sir," she said, her voice low, almost fragile. "My parents died when I was very young. Since then I have only known work, cleaning, cooking, carrying things, whatever would give me coins for food." Her words seemed to hang heavy in the air. She glanced at his face, expecting to see boredom or annoyance, but his gaze did not leave hers. "I have a younger brother," she continued softly. "He's still a child and he depends on me. Every coin I earn here, I send half of it back to him, so he can stay in school in the village. He is clever, sir, smarter than me. I don't want him to waste his life the way I had to waste mine." Her lips trembled as she clutched the edge of the notebook. "That is why I study, because if I only work, then nothing changes. I will remain a maid forever. But if I learn, if I fight, then maybe, just maybe, I can give him a better life. And myself too." Adrian's eyes flickered with something she could not name. He had heard countless people speak of ambition, of wealth, of climbing ladders. But Maria's words were different. She was not driven by greed or vanity. She was driven by love. Love for her brother and a fragile hope for her own future. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I dream of being a teacher one day," she admitted. The words sounded almost too big for the tiny room, too bold for someone in a maid's uniform. She quickly looked down, ashamed of her own courage. "I know it is foolish. I know people like me do not belong in colleges, but when I read, when I write, I feel like I am closer, even if it is only in my imagination." Her voice cracked and she blinked away the tears threatening to fall. "That is why I sit here at night, sir, even when I am tired, even when my hands ache. Because if I don't try, then I will lose everything before I even begin." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Maria dared not lift her eyes. She thought he might laugh at her. She thought he might remind her of her place, of the reality that crushed dreams like hers before they could take shape. But when Adrian finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Maria." She looked up slowly, her heart beating painfully in her chest. "You think it is foolish?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes, sir. At least sometimes it feels that way." Adrian's gaze was distant now, as if he was seeing not her, but his own past reflected in her words. "Then let me tell you something. Long ago, there were nights when I studied under a broken street lamp because I had no candle. There were mornings when I walked to work hungry because my family could not afford bread. And there were people who told me exactly what you just told me now, that it was foolish to dream. Maria's eyes widened, stunned. She had never imagined him as anything other than wealthy, powerful, untouchable. He took a slow breath, his voice steady. But I did not stop. And that is why I stand here now, in this mansion, asking you about your dream. Not because I am mocking you, but because I understand it. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes blurred with tears she could no longer hide. For the first time, someone had not only listened to her dream, but connected to it. She pressed her hands against her notebook as if it were her very heart. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, not of shame this time, but of release. And Adrian, watching her, felt something he had not felt in years, an echo of his younger self, a reminder that behind every silent struggle there is a story waiting to be heard. That night, in the flickering light of a candle, two worlds touched, one of wealth and power, the other of quiet poverty and stubborn hope. And though nothing was promised yet, Maria's dream no longer felt so lonely. The night stretched on, but neither Maria nor Adrian seemed aware of the hour. The candle between them burned lower, its flame soft and fragile, yet its light felt enough to hold their entire world at that moment. Maria sat quietly, her story laid bare. For the first time she had confessed her deepest wish, something she had hidden even from the other servants. Her hand still rested on her notebook, her eyes red from tears, but there was a strange calmness inside her now. It was the calm that comes after releasing a secret too heavy to carry alone. Adrian stood near the small desk, his arms crossed loosely, his expression unreadable. His sharp eyes, usually filled with calculation and control, were distant. He was not thinking about his businesses, his wealth, or his empire. He was thinking about the girl before him, the maid who studied by candlelight after endless hours of work. For years, Adrian had surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him. Investors wanted profits, partners wanted power, strangers wanted favors. But Maria, she wanted nothing from him. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't begged for money. She had only fought quietly for her dream, even when it seemed impossible. Her humility struck him more than any request could have. "Maria," he said finally, his deep voice breaking the silence. She looked up quickly, her eyes wide. "Yes, sir?" He studied her for a long moment. "Why did you never tell me this before?" Her lips parted slightly. She hesitated, then lowered her gaze again. "Because it is not your problem, sir. You already gave me work here. That is enough. I didn't want to seem ungrateful." Adrian felt the words hit him like a quiet blow. In his life, he had met many who asked for more, who complained even when they had plenty. Yet here was a girl who struggled every day, who worked harder than anyone he knew, and still believed she had no right to ask for more. He remembered his own youth, when people laughed at his ambitions, when he had wanted nothing more than a chance and no one offered it to him. He had carved his way up alone, carrying scars no one else could see. Perhaps that was why her determination touched him so deeply. He stepped closer to the desk, his eyes fixed on the notebook she held so tightly. "You should not hide your fire, Maria," he said quietly. "Dreams are not foolish. They are the only reason people like us survive." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Adrian looked at her again, and in that moment, he made a decision, one that even surprised himself. "Maria," he said, firmly, "you will not fight for this dream alone." Her breath caught. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Sir, I will help you," he continued, his voice steady. "If you truly wish to study, then you will. If you want to enter college, then you will. Money will not stand in your way. Not while you work under my roof." The words felt like thunder in the small room. Maria's eyes widened, her lips trembling as if she could not believe what she was hearing. But, sir, I... Adrian lifted a hand gently, silencing her stammer. This is not charity, he added. This is an investment in someone who refuses to give up. People like you are rare, and I will not allow your fire to die in the dark. Tears blurred Maria's vision, spilling down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them away. She pressed her notebook against her chest, her body trembling with emotions she had never felt before. Hope, gratitude, disbelief. No one has ever said something like that to me, she whispered brokenly. Adrian's face softened, though his voice remained calm. Then it is time. Someone did. For years, Maria had carried her dream alone, in silence, in fear. But that night, in the quiet of the servants' quarters, she realized she was no longer fighting alone. Adrian Cole, the man she thought untouchable, had made a decision that would change her life forever. And though she could not yet imagine the full weight of it, she knew one thing with certainty. Her dream was no longer just hers. It was alive now, shared and protected. The morning after their late-night conversation, Maria woke with heavy eyes. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying Adrian's words. You will not fight for this dream alone. She had wanted to believe him, but a part of her still thought perhaps he had only said those things to comfort her. Wealthy men lived in another world. Maybe by morning he would forget. Maybe it had only been a passing kindness. As the sunlight filtered through the small window, she stretched and rubbed her eyes. That was when she noticed something unusual on her desk. A white envelope lay neatly on top of her books. Her breath caught. She hadn't placed it there. With trembling hands, she picked it up. Her name was written across the front in neat handwriting. Heart racing, she opened it. Inside was a letter, folded carefully, along with several official-looking documents. Her eyes darted to the letter first. The words were written in Adrian's hand. Maria, I have thought about what you told me. You remind me of myself, long ago, and I cannot let someone with such fire waste away in silence. Inside this envelope, you will find documents that will open the doors you thought closed to you. Your tuition for college has been fully paid, not just for 1 year but for the entire program. You will also find arrangements for your brother's schooling. He will no longer have to struggle as you did. Your job here will remain for you should you ever need it. But I hope you walk boldly into the future instead. Do not waste this chance. Adrian Cole. Maria's vision blurred instantly as tears filled her eyes. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stop the sob that rose from deep inside her chest. Her gaze fell on the documents. With shaking fingers, she lifted them. They were real. Admission, papers, fee receipts, confirmation letters from a prestigious college in the city. Another paper was a school enrollment form for her brother, signed and stamped. Her tears spilled freely now, falling onto the papers she held. It felt unreal, impossible. Only hours ago, her dream had been nothing more than late-night scribbles in a notebook, kept alive by fragile hope. And now, it was real. The door she thought locked forever had been opened by the very man she had thought too distant to ever notice her. Maria sat on her bed, clutching the papers to her chest. Her body trembled as waves of gratitude, disbelief, and overwhelming joy crashed over her. No one has ever done this for me, she whispered into the quiet room. Every sacrifice, every night she stayed awake despite her exhaustion, every tear she had hidden in the dark, all of it suddenly felt worth it. She thought of her brother, how his life would change. He would have the chance she never had as a child. He would not have to break his back for scraps of survival. For the first time, Maria saw a future that was not only survival, but hope. Later that day, when she gathered her courage and went to thank Adrian, her voice trembled so much she could barely speak. She found him in his study, seated at his desk as calm as ever. "Sir?" she whispered, her eyes still wet. "Why would you do this for me?" Adrian looked up from his papers, his gaze steady. For a moment he said nothing, as though choosing his words carefully. Then he answered simply, "Because someone once opened a door for me when I thought the world had locked it. I would not be standing here if they hadn't. Now it is my turn to do the same." Her tears fell harder, but this time they were tears of hope, not despair. She bowed deeply, clutching the documents close. "I will not waste this, sir. I promise you I will not waste it." And as Adrian watched her leave, something inside him softened. For years, his mansion had been filled with silence and wealth, but little meaning. But that morning, as he saw the spark in Maria's eyes, he realized he had just invested in something far greater than business. He had invested in a dream, and it had shocked them both how powerful that truly was. Years passed like chapters in a book, quietly turning one after another. The seasons changed. The mansion aged a little, and Adrian Cole continued to live the life of a wealthy man. His empire grew larger, his name became even more respected, but strangely, none of it gave him the warmth he felt the night he chose to help Maria. Maria's life, on the other hand, was no longer the same. With Adrian's support, she entered college. At first it was overwhelming. She was a maid among students who had never known hunger or hard labor. She often doubted herself, sitting in classrooms where everything felt too fast, too difficult. But each time she felt close to giving up, she remembered the letter Adrian had left her. "Do not waste this chance." She didn't. Maria studied with the same fire that had once burned under a single candlelight in her small room. She worked harder than anyone else, fueled by the memory of her struggles and the thought of her younger brother, who now thrived in school because of the opportunity given to him. Slowly, her grades rose. Slowly, she proved to herself that she did belong there. 4 years later, she graduated with honors. Her dream of becoming a teacher, once fragile and hidden, was now real. She found herself standing in front of classrooms, filled with children, holding books not as a maid but as an educator. She looked into their young faces and saw hope reflected back at her. Each time she wrote on the blackboard, she felt alive. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot the man who had opened the door for her. One quiet afternoon, Maria returned to the mansion. She no longer wore the uniform of a maid. Instead, she wore a simple dress, carrying her diploma carefully in her bag. Her steps echoed softly against the familiar marble floor. She felt nervous, almost as if she were once again that young girl clutching her notebook in secret. She found Adrian in the garden, seated on a bench under the shade of an old oak tree. His hair had grown more silver since she last saw him, but his posture remained straight, his presence strong. He looked up when he heard her approach, and for the first time in years, a rare smile touched his lips. "Maria," he said, his deep voice steady. She bowed her head respectfully, but when she raised it, her eyes glistened with tears. Without hesitation, she took out her diploma and held it toward him. "I came to show you this, sir. I am a teacher now." Adrian took the diploma gently, his eyes scanning the words. For a moment he said nothing, but Maria noticed how his fingers lingered on the paper, how his expression softened in a way she had never seen before. "You did it," he said finally, his voice quiet but filled with pride. Maria's tears fell freely as she nodded. "No, sir. We did it. I would not be here if not for you. You didn't just change my life. You saved it. And my brother's too." She stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life teaching others, giving them the hope you gave me. Because of you, I know dreams are not foolish." Adrian's chest tightened with a feeling he had long buried. He had built empires, collected wealth, and stood at the top of society, but never had he felt such meaning in his success as he did in that moment. As Maria sat beside him in the garden, both silent for a while, Adrian realized something profound. Wealth had given him comfort, respect, and power. But helping Maria had given him something none of those things could: purpose. The mansion no longer felt so empty. It no longer echoed only with silence. Somewhere in its walls was the memory of a young maid who had once studied by candlelight, and the spark she carried had lit a fire even in his heart. That day, Adrian understood a truth he had never seen before. The greatest legacy a man can leave is not his money, not his buildings, not his name carved into glass towers. It is the lives he touches, the dreams he helps to grow. And as the sun dipped low over the garden, Maria's laughter ringing softly beside him, Adrian Cole felt, perhaps for the first time in his life, truly rich.